Hi, I'm Jim Canallen, and this is my doctoral writing and inquiry into research class, Module 6 assignment. So, you want to conduct a research study. The first thing you have to ask yourself is why? What is it that you want to learn or know? For example, suppose you are an executive at a large company and you want your employees to be more creative and productive in their meetings. You have anecdotal evidence that managers who schedule their weekly meetings at different locations report more creative involvement on the part of their participants. You might wonder if this is a true phenomenon or not. Perhaps this is something worth performing a research study on. If validated, it's something that could be easily instituted throughout the organization. The first thing you'll want to do is perform a literature search. Odds are someone else had this idea before and may have studied it, or something related to it. A rigorous literature search could save a lot of time and provide some foundational understanding of the problem that will be useful in the case that you do perform a full research study. After the literature search, you'll want to define or redefine your goals, objectives, and theory. You're also ready to state a tentative hypothesis. A hypothesis is something that defines a predicted relationship between some variables. For example, participants in regular meetings will be more creative when the meeting venue changes. An alternative way to express this is with a null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is a statement that there is no relationship between the variables. For example, participants' creativity in regular meetings is not affected by changes in the venue. An important property of a hypothesis is it can be tested. Unless the hypothesis is expressed in a way that results in a true or false statement, it can't be tested. With your theory in hand and a tentative hypothesis to test, we can move on to the study design. There are lots of different types of study designs, both experimental and non-experimental, and in between. Experimental designs are used to test hypotheses, whereas non-experimental designs are better to understand a phenomenon or develop a theory from. In this case, your theory is best understood and studied with an experimental design that will test the hypothesis. The first thing we need to think about for the study is the population and sample. The population is a term used to describe the total group that is of interest to the researcher, and where the generalizations of the research may be applied to. In the case that you want to apply the study to all the employees of your company that participate in regular meetings. The sample is a subset of this population that will participate in the experimental study. Ideally, this will be a representative example, one in which the sample is similar to the population in all the important characteristics except size. There are many techniques to sampling. Random sampling techniques include stratified, clustered, systematic. There are also non-random sampling techniques that include convenience, quota, purposive, and snowball sampling. Understanding sampling is critical in identifying bias in the results. As the researcher, you'll want to ensure that the sample is representative of the population as a whole. So you might not want to select a division within the company that you know contains employees with specific characteristics. For example, the IT department might contain a significantly larger proportion of younger employees than the company as a whole. In the end, you'll need to select a sample population that is pragmatic, like a single department in the company that you have the ability to dictate new meeting guidelines to. The design study also includes the identification of the variables in play, the dependent variables, independent variables, and even confounding variables. The dependent variables are the ones that you eventually want to influence, like the creativity of the meeting participants. The independent ones are those that you can easily change, like the venue of the meeting. Confounding variables are those external variables that can affect the relationships that, if not controlled for, may invalidate the theory and validity of the results. Confounding variables in this case might include the time of day of the meetings or the meeting room size. Other common confounding variables include demographics, like age and gender. The study design also includes the tools used to conduct the study. For example, how will the data be collected? One common data collection mechanism is the questionnaire. You might have managers or meeting organizers fill out a questionnaire after every meeting during the study. The questions should be designed to assess the creativity of the participants in the meeting, as well as provide other useful information like participation percentage, the agenda size, and so forth. Leverage what you learned from your literature search to craft the questions that will help you identify the level of creativity coming out in the meeting. For example, you might want to include questions like, how many new ideas were brought up in the meeting? What percentage of participation or participants contributed to the new ideas? What percentage of the time in the meeting was devoted to discussing the new ideas? No study design would be complete without an investigation into the ethics of the study. Every researcher needs to consider at some point the ethics of what is being done. This includes the relationship between the subjects and science in general, the researcher's professional and integrity issues, and the treatment of the subjects. You must first ask yourself, is this good science? Is it something that will benefit science and the population as a whole? Are you prepared to be honest and objective in your work? And will this research adversely affect the subjects in any way? For example, is there a risk that changing venues will put employees at risk? On distributed campuses, will travel between buildings increase the risk of street accidents? Do you need explicit consent on the part of those participating in the study? Will this affect the study itself? Understanding and exploring the ethical concerns may change the study design and better protect the subjects in the sample. In this case, it is likely that you will not need explicit consent forms to be filled out, but given the nature of the data collection, it may be required to provide some level of explanation of the study to those answering the questions. This could introduce a bias into the study that will have to be accounted for in a post-study survey. For example, employees that like changing venues might self-report higher creativity, or the reverse. Some research designs, especially those related to the testing of medicines and medical procedures, include the use of animals. Additional ethical concerns arise when animals are involved, particularly because they often have very little say as to whether they want to participate in the study or not. Such studies also tend to include treatments that may not be favorable to the health and well-being of the animal subjects. Every study will be different, and the level of ethical concerns will differ. It is important that studies be reviewed by an external board before they are carried out. An institutional review board is the place where the potential benefits of the research study can be compared with the costs, monetary, ethical, or other. The review board will take an objective look at what and how the study will include, and give permission to carry out those that are justified. With the complete design and approved design, it may be useful to conduct a pilot study. That is, an ultra-small scale version of the study. A pilot study is used to get quick validation of the study design itself. Do the questions imply any bias? Do the meeting managers have the ability to complete the questionnaires? Are there too many or too few questions? Are the questions too vague? Results of the pilot are used to refine the study before it is carried out in full. Finally, the study starts and the data is collected. In your case, you've probably selected a sufficient period of time to allow for the desired effect to emerge. Let's say 6 months. After the 6 months of data collection, the questionnaires are analyzed. The goal of analysis is to obtain useful information from the study. It describes and summarizes the data and identifies the relationships between the variables. In the case of experimental research, it determines if the hypothesis, or the null hypothesis, is true or not. As the researcher in this example, you'll compare the two treatment groups, single venue and changing venue, with the creativity values returned from the questionnaires. There are many ways to analyze data from a research study. Tests like the Pearson's chi-squared test can determine how likely it is that any observed differences in sets of data arose by chance. You can validate the null hypothesis by determining that there is no difference in the responses to the questions based on treatment. Or you can validate the hypothesis by determining that the observed results of the questions favored more creativity by a statistically significant amount. The analysis of the results provides conclusions and interpretations of the data that can be used to predict future behavior. The final step in the study is to prepare the report and document your results. This is an important step for researchers as it allows others to both learn from your results and ideally validate your results and conclusions with similar studies. This is also the time to be self-critical. Good study reports will include sections for discussing the validity, both internal and external, of the study. It is important that the report is objective and complete. Omissions in data or method could be signs of an invalid study. If all goes well, and this study does indicate that changes in venue for periodic meetings are beneficial to creativity, the executive may decide to institute the changes in the meeting guidelines for the company.